What's up, everybody? Welcome in to the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm your host today, Brendan Glasheen, joined by Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward. That means a UFC betting preview. Please subscribe, rate, and review because every Friday we're here. Myself, Sean Zerillo, Billy Ward, giving out some underdogs, props, and best bets around the UFC weekend. This weekend, UFC Mexico at CDMX in Mexico City. We'll weave our way through. If you're new to the podcast, we've been around now a couple weeks for this year's cards. And we'll hit the main event, fight of the night for Sean and Billy, find some dogs, find some props, and then leave with the best bet, final bet. You know the inside joke at this point if you have tuned in already. So without further ado, the Battle of the Brandons. Brandon Moreno, Brandon Royval, Sean Zerillo is the featured main event. Looking at the line, how would you evaluate the line, and then how would you like to bet the fight?
These two fought in the past. Royval had his shoulder dislocated. The fight ended early as a result of that shoulder dislocation. But I think since they last fought, Moreno has made the more substantial improvements as a fighter. And I think he has the advantage pretty much everywhere in this matchup. He's the better striker, both the better boxer and the better kicker. He's the much better wrestler, and I think that's the biggest key to this fight. When he decides to wrestle, when he decides to offensively wrestle, I do think he can hold Royval down for extended stretches or just land multiple takedowns in each round. The problem with Brandon Moreno, and I should also mention he's super durable. He's a more durable fighter as well. So, the physical advantages, the skills advantages, technique, I think all favor Moreno. Royval's advantages, reach advantage, and volume potentially over 25 minutes if they just strike it out. I think he could potentially pull away on volume over Moreno. But when Moreno decides to wrestle, I think he's going to look like a big favorite in this fight once he gets on top. And Royval struggles to defend takedowns, 40% takedown defense in the UFC. The one issue with Moreno is fight IQ, and he doesn't always give himself the easiest path to victory or follow the path of least resistance. I think there's a chance that he strikes this out longer than he should, where if he does, as I said, proactively wrestle, I think he's going to have an easier time of it and cover his price. So to me, this matchup, Moreno, if he wrestles proactively, should look like a minus 400 favorite or more. I projected his line at minus 320. I think he's a safe parlay piece. Anything minus 300 or better, I'd probably even considered laying it too. In terms of other value on this fight, the fight to go over 3.5 rounds to reach a decision. We'll talk a little bit more about the elevation later and the cardio dynamics of some of these fights. And, my skepticism of betting fights to reach a decision as opposed to betting them just to go over, because I think we could see some finishes on this card that happen in the final couple minutes of these fights. But in terms of the main event, like Brandon Moreno is a parlay piece, parlayed him up with another piece in the next fight that we will talk about. So I'll get to that in a moment. And then one other favorite I like on this card, Faris Ziem. I'm considering parlaying Moreno with him too. Probably not going to get to that fight later, so I'll just talk about it briefly. Ziem against Puelles. Puelles, I think like Royval, it's like a 10 to 20% chance. They have to meet their win condition of finding a finish inside the distance. Puelles, a knee bar specialist. There's a chance he could get it in a scramble, but other than that, I think Ziem wins the fight. And I think with the Moreno fight, other than Royval hitting something, finding a guillotine, finding a moment where he stuns Moreno, hurts him, is able to finish the fight, I think Moreno is largely winning minutes and controlling the pace here. So Moreno, as I said, you could parlay him up to about minus 300. I think he's pretty safe for Saturday night.
Your analysis just brought me back to last summer when you parlayed a piece of UFC with the London series in baseball. I was wondering if you were going to bring up the Dodgers or the Padres in a spring training game as a parlay combination. But
yeah, not quite ready to parlay some spring training games yet with these lineups we get thrown out there, but maybe later on in the spring, by the time we get to the next pay-per-view, maybe we'll have a UFC baseball parlay going on.
I'm going to hold you to that. I couldn't help it. Billy Ward authors the UFC luck ratings over at Action Network, actionnetwork.com. And Billy, you identify you have an identification on this fight based on the line that Royval is slightly undervalued. Right now, looking at the sportsbook BetMGM, Royval right around plus 220, Moreno minus 290. So are you still in the same boat with Royval being undervalued? And I guess that sort of counters Zerillo, but not quite.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a strong take. I think this one is pretty close to right. we're going to talk about the elevation a lot here. We're also going to talk about all these fights. There's 3 fights on this card that are rebooked because something weird happened at a different event that they're bringing back. This one, Moreno was winning the first fight. He wasn't dominating. He wasn't about to finish him or anything, but he was looking better than Royval. I think the one thing that Royval has going for him is he's a little bit more aggressive. He hunts the finish a little bit harder. He's coming forward more. If he's going to win, I think he's going to do it inside the distance. He almost has to. So getting that at plus 400, if I had to bet this one, honestly, if this were in a main event, I probably wouldn't really be betting it or talking about it at all. I think the books are more or less right. I do want to point out, it's a little bit interesting with the cardio dynamic at elevation. Royval trains in Denver at Factory X. Moreno trains in Las Vegas at sea level. But Moreno was originally supposed to fight a different opponent. Royval's coming in about 4 or 5 weeks' notice. That's not super short notice, and you can get in cardio shape in that time. But is he going to be 5 rounds at 7,000 feet elevation cardio in 4 or 5 weeks? I don't know. So it's more of a, if you think Royval's going to win it, it almost certainly needs to be inside the distance. And that's before we even talk about how the judges are going to respond to the Mexican fighters here, which we have to assume that, Moreno does anything, the crowd's going to lose their mind. That's going to influence the judges. We're going to talk about that with, I think, a couple other fights as we get down the stretch here. So all those factors, don't love the bet, but, it's a little bit sprinkle at plus 400. Royval inside the distance, that should be closer to his money line.
I'm glad you brought up the short notice, Billy, because Pantoja, or I should say Royval, also fought Alexander Pantoja at UFC 296, which is in mid-December. So if he didn't immediately go back into camp after that fight, then he took this fight on short notice. How much did he actually train in the past 8 weeks? So it's not only the short notice nature, he also had a fight 2 months ago, and then took a fight on short notice. Like I said, if he didn't get right back in the training room, how much has he really trained, in the past 8 weeks?
Although I will say my assumption is always, and this is probably overfitting my personal experience, that coming off a loss, guys are going to be right back in the gym. Mm-hmm. Coming off a win, they're probably going to take some time, celebrate, cash those fight of the night, performance bonuses, all that. So I'm not entirely worried about it because it's not like he took it last week. He had 4 or 5 weeks. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a good point that's another factor. If he was banged up, even if he wanted to train, he might not have been. So there's a lot going into it.
Just before that fight, we've got Yair Rodriguez and Brian Ortega. The fights are streaming this week on ESPN Plus in Mexico City. So get the nap in on Saturday if you want to stay up late, if you need the nap on the East Coast. Okay, so Zerillo, Rodriguez, the favorite at minus 150, Ortega plus 120 on the money line. Same question. How do you identify what you might like in the fight? And based on that, that probably comes from how do you see the fight unfolding?
Yeah, another fight that, previously happened, ended via injury. I was at the fight on Long Island. This was headlining the card, and that's why this fight is booked for 5 rounds, because these two were supposed to have a main event last time. The winner will probably get Ilia Topuria in Spain for the featherweight title. So definitely some big implications here between Rodriguez and Ortega. Yair is the better striker, Ortega the better grappler, and I do think this is a pretty binary fight. Not that Ortega can't strike, but his striking defense is horrible, and he seems to not be reacting as well to absorbing damage as he was earlier in his career. I mean, he used to be a Mexican zombie. Like, he was TKZ and just looking to walk through damage and eventually get his hands on people and finish them with the grappling. Now, the way that first fight did play out with Yair and Ortega, Yair was piecing him up in the first round, but Ortega eventually got his hands on him and it seemed like he was winning the clinch positions, took Yair down, seemed like he was going to progress and win the round from there, but he got hurt via injury. And you could give Yair credit or not for the submission. Didn't seem like it was something that fully locked in, seemed like more of an accident. But regardless, I do think this is fairly binary. I like it to end inside the distance because it is going 5 rounds at elevation. Minus 200 on that prop. I think you could parlay that with Brandon Moreno in the main event. I think that's a fine even money parlay to pair together. But I also like Ortega by submission at plus 375. I don't really get the pricing on his knockout prop. His knockout prop is sitting much closer to his submission prop than I think it should be. It's like plus 650, plus 700. His submission prop's about plus half that. I'd make his sub prop closer to plus 250. I'd put his K prop over 10 to 1, 11 to 1, 12 to 1. Ground and pound TKO, the only way he's getting that done. But other than that, I think he has a big grappling advantage in this fight. And I think if he gets Yair to the ground, I think he's going to find ways to finish. So Ortega by submission plus 375 is the best number I found. You could also consider betting him inside the distance. I just think the sub prop is a better number. And then, as I said, the fight to end inside the distance at -200. If Ortega doesn't get the submission, or as he's trying to enter to get takedowns to find submissions, I think he's going to absorb a lot of damage, get beat up, maybe take a head kick, get knocked out. Yair definitely has better kicks than he does hands, so maybe that actually helps Ortega to a degree in terms of getting in closer, getting those entries. Just not sure how he is, in terms of his durability to the body as opposed to the head. We've seen him absorb like thousands of head strikes and not go down. Maybe he eats 1 or 2 liver kicks here and folds. We just haven't seen his body get hit nearly as much as we have to the head. So, like I said, binary and inside the distance, but Ortega to win it via submission.
Okay, and Rodriguez does have a slight height advantage, Billy. And knowing this is a 5-round fight, how do you break it down, and how would you like to bet it?
Yeah, this is a really interesting fight. To counter what Sean was saying about the discrepancy between submissions and knockouts, that was my read on it early as well, but Ortega has just as many TKOs in the UFC as he does submissions. He's not, only diving for subs. He'll get top position, beat you up. I think it's more likely that he gets a submission for a lot of reasons, but I don't think it's all that crazy to see him finishing it. With that said, if he finishes it, it's on the ground. It's through grappling. It's just what that result ends up being. Very interesting fight. They're kind of like mirror images of each other in a way where Ortega's striking defense is to just walk forward and try to hit you back, and Yair's wrestling defense is to let you take him down and try to throw up a submission, where neither of them are really interested in stopping what you're trying to do. They're just trying to pose enough of a threat that you can't do it. On paper here, I think Ortega's style is actually kryptonite for Yair Rodriguez. Rodriguez likes to kick. He needs space. He's a Taekwondo guy where they like to operate at range and throwing out long stuff. Ortega's just storming forward the whole fight, trying to get in your face. Doesn't really care if you hit him, just trying to make contact, takes you down. Yair doesn't really defend that. That's on paper. With him being out 18 months with that torn shoulder, I have my concerns with that, which is why I'm not betting Ortega's money line. But I think I trust his durability here. We haven't really seen him take any bad knockouts. His striking differential is horrible if you look at the stats. A lot of that is from fights with Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski, who do that to everyone. But he's never really been knocked out. He has a doctor stoppage or a corner stoppage, one of the two, and then a shoulder injury. So my favorite bet on this, if you can find it at certain books, is the finish-only market on Brian Ortega, which it gets refunded if it goes to the judges. I think, like we're talking about with the Mexican fighters, judges probably favor Yair kind of no matter what happens here, but they probably should because he's going to do more striking, where Ortega's going to get takedowns, hunt for subs, maybe not get them. And then at BetMGM, Ortega inside the distance at +200. I'm fine if you want to take the longer odds on the submission. It makes sense as well, but I'd rather just get the 2-1 and cover myself if there's a ground and pound.
Yeah, I should clarify. So I took a sub prop at +375. The best available price beyond that was +340, and I actually saw as low as +280. So it really depends on the price. Like if it's +200 versus +280, take the +200 all day on the inside the distance. Getting nearly double the price on the sub, I thought was a little bit too much. Even, +340, I think there's enough of a discrepancy to play it. So it depends on, the gap in the numbers, and how far apart it is. Like I said, if it was +280, I would be on the +200 instead.
Always important to bring up the price. The money has come in on Ortega throughout the week, opened around +135, +140, so that number has come down, his money line price. Quickly, on both fights, the flyweight and the featherweight, the ones we just discussed, no live angles. Just curious if you guys identify any value, because I know we hit live betting quite a bit last week. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I might be interested in Ortega live. If Yair wins the first round, as this fight extends, Yair will slow down a little bit, and it'll just create more opportunities for Ortega to get his hands on him and grapple him. They're in the bigger cage. Yair has great footwork. He's very fast. He's a really good kickboxer. And just, with the first fight that played out, when they were at distance, when Yair could kick him from range, Ortega looked like he was in trouble. But the closer he got, Yair wasn't able to kick as freely because he didn't want to get a kick caught and get taken down. So just watch the way that fight plays out. I do think Ortega is going to have moments. He had moments against Volkanovski, even though he was mostly getting beaten up. Those happened in the 3rd or 4th round. So Ortega finds ways to threaten his opponents. He's continually losing fights. You just go back through his UFC run, continually losing the first 2 rounds, finishes his opponents in the 3rd round. So yeah, if Ortega's price grows, after round 1, after round 2, he's an opportunistic finisher. I think he's going to have moments. So definitely would be interested in an entry on Ortega live. Moreno Royval, I guess, given the short notice nature, probably more interested on Moreno live, maybe after round 1, if that price moves in at all. You know, you can get minus 150 on Moreno after he loses round 1, something like that. I'd be interested, but not as aggressive there. I think more so Ortega, just because of the dynamics of how he usually fights and the way he doesn't give up on himself and usually finds a way to threaten his opponent at some point.
Anything to add, Billy, on the live betting component?
Yeah, and this is a big, if I'm able to stay awake and lucid this late into the night, but I like the main event. I don't have a plan going into it, I don't think, but it's one of those where I could certainly see a situation where Royval looks fresher just because he trains at elevation, he's used to that. I could also see where the short notice and the recent fight make him not look the case. So if you can really be on it and look at the body language and look how the guys are doing and maybe catch a round that swung the other way or a price that swung the other way, I think that's a good one. Can't give you any kind of strategy going in, but that's one you kind of know it when you see it. And again, keep in mind, if you see a big price on Moreno because it looks like he lost a couple rounds, he might not have actually lost those rounds. So that's another one. Like if it looks like it's going to the judges, then you can get a big price on Moreno. That's where I think I would be on that.
Yeah, I mean, watch how the rounds play out too. Like, the Fluffy Hernandez Roman Kopylov fight last week, which Billy and I both said about live. Billy had Kopylov pre-fight, but he loved the live angle. Hernandez won the end of round 1. He was grappling Kopylov at the end of round 1, and he was minus 110 after round 1. I mean, I thought he should have been minus 200 at that point. I think he might have even won round 1 on the scorecards. I don't think he should have won round 1. I thought Kopylov's body kicks did better work, but the flow of the fight, I thought Hernandez should have been like way more juiced up than minus 110 at that point, even plus money. There was another fight on that card as well that we said about live where the fighter might have actually won round 1 and you were getting a better price after round 1. It was Merab. Merab didn't win the first round, but you got like minus 110 on Merab or even plus money on Merab after round 1. So yeah, these live angles, I think the markets continue to be mispriced, and I think it's the best way to bet this sport. And we'll get to it with my best bets later because I think it's the best way to bet on this card.
Oh, excellent tease, Zerillo. Okay, before we get there, let's discuss this week a consensus underdog from Billy and Zerillo. Flyweight prelim. Go ahead, Zerillo. Who is it?
It's always funny when I hear you say Billy Zerillo because that's my uncle's name. So it's weird when we combine those together. It throws me off.
Sean and Billy.
Victor Altamirano. Billy and I have a separate process, right? We have a shared document where we put our picks in, but I try not to look at it until I've finalized my card or at least like finalized my picks for the podcast. And sometimes I'll open it up and we're on opposite sides of the fight. And I'm like, all right, cool content. Other times I open it up and we have the same pick and the same underdog pick. And that really excites me because it means we've arrived at the same conclusion in a different way. And I think both of us are going to say one very key point here, which is that Felipe dos Santos is overrated because he overperformed on short notice in his UFC debut. I think Billy would 100% agree with that point. This is something that we see constantly. Guys who come in on short notice as big underdogs and then overperform against a good opponent in their UFC debut, but lose, tend to be more heavily favored in their next fights than I think they should be. And if Dos Santos hadn't had that performance against Manel Kape in the UFC, if you were only evaluating him off of that regional tape that he has, Altamirano would be favored here because his regional tape was horrible. And he doesn't defend strikes. He has absolutely no striking defense. He's really fun to watch. He's the type of guy who's going to secure performance bonuses or be in multiple fight of the nights because he has no attention to defense. He's purely offensive. He just comes forward. He's extremely aggressive. I think both of these fighters have bad takedown defense. I think either one can get on top for long stretches. But I think of the two, Altamirano is just a much better defensive striker. He has more UFC experience. The thing that worries me is the age differential, and Dos Santos likely improving. He's 23, Altamirano's 33. I believe the average age for the division is 31. So the age differential stat definitely scares me. But the UFC experience of Altamirano, the quality of his wins, the defensive striking, we've seen him in wars before too against guys like Daniel Lacerda, where he was able to weather the storm, work his way back into the fight, come back. He's generally a pretty durable guy. So Victor Altamirano here, I think, just has plenty of ways of making this a competitive 50-50 fight. Getting plus 240 against the guy who hasn't really proven at this level, I think is a very juicy number.
I think of the Shane Gillis screenshot when he puts his head down like this. when you both have the same pick and you open up the podcast doc on Friday morning when we record. Billy, I read your luck ratings write-up, and the first sentence of Billy's write-up to support Victor. This is a line I truly don't understand. That is an attention grabber sentence. Echo Zerillo's sentiments, please, if you may.
Yeah, well, to Sean's credit, he made me understand it a little bit better by getting into the moral victory his last time out. But, we don't get performance bonuses. We don't get win bonuses. Our bets don't cash based on moral victories. That's not how any of this works. I'm glad he brought up the fight with Daniel Lacerda, who I'm going to talk about later. That's like the same fight. Like Felipe Dos Santos is the same dude. Like we just saw that happen. And Altamirano was standing in there, getting into a war. Then he's like, oh, if I just take him down, I'm going to dominate this guy. Altamirano, I think a little bit bigger for the division, like, strength wise. He's 2-2 in the UFC. One of his losses was a split. The other was a decision to Tim Elliott. You can't learn anything from watching people fight Tim Elliott because Tim Elliott doesn't fight like any other human in the history of the world. So, like, just pretend that one didn't happen. And yeah, Dos Santos looked fine against Kopp. He had his moments, but coming in off 2 decision wins outside of the promotion, one of those is split, not really dominant. The only thing I really want to add that I think Sean didn't touch on is this fight has the longest or the best odds to go to the judges of any fight on the card. It's the most likely to go to a decision. What I've been talking about all week, Mexican fighter does anything, he's going to get a huge pop that sways the judges. If we expect this to be a stand-up, back and forth brawl between 2 light guys, probably don't hurt each other too bad. Those are tough to judge. No matter where they put this fight, if we think it's a decision that's kind of hard to judge, I want the plus 230, plus 240 ticket, no matter where it is. Now we say the underdog is the hometown fighter and is going to have that crowd support. Even better case for that. So yeah, that's the only thing that Sean didn't really get to that I wanted to include, but totally agree with everything else.
One additional thing too, all of the Brazilian fighters on this card arrived in Mexico City the week of the fights. And, again, we keep teasing that we're going to talk about elevation. But the fighters who are accustomed to training in Mexico or who train at elevation, they're just going to have an inherent advantage here. And the fighters who didn't come as early, it takes you a few weeks to acclimate to elevation. The Brazilians who got there this week, they're not acclimated. The guys who fight in Mexico, train in Mexico, they're a bit more acclimated. So that is a hidden advantage in the line as well. But yeah, like I don't see how you could justify the line. And I think the Lacerda fight is a very good example for how this might go. And Altamirano live after round 1, I think a solid target too. If that line blows out even more, if he gets knocked down, gets back up, still in the fight, he'll work his way back at it. So yeah, Altamirano a solid live target as well.
Okay, excellent. A consensus underdog. We're back. Let's go to props. How is the prop market this week, Zerillo? How would you look at it overall, and what jumps out to you?
Yeah, so Billy and I are on opposite sides of props for this fight, but I think you could probably play all 3 together. But, in terms of the overall prop outlook for this card, I'm probably going to be taking more overs and goes to decisions, probably more overs. Okay. I think a lot of these fights are juiced to end inside the distance due to the elevation. And I think there's a number of fights that I have projected to go to a decision more than 50% of the time that you're getting plus money on. So going to be some unfun sweats. It's the worst bet in sports. I mean, it legitimately, like, betting an over on a UFC fight is the most unfun, worst bet in sports. But probably profitable long-term, I'd imagine, because it's so, incredibly discouraging to bet. But in terms of, the prop or the fight that Billy and I targeted from a prop perspective, we just mentioned him, Daniel Lacerda against Edgar Chairez. These two also fought previously, and this ended, I think, via submission for Chairez, but then it was overturned due to the review officials. It should have been upheld. It was a very odd and awkward stoppage that the referee essentially screwed up. But I don't really see it playing out much differently. Lacerda, in all of his fights, is a danger to finish in round 1. And Chairez is very durable and has good submission defense. So I think he weathers that storm. Billy will make a better case for Lacerda in round 1, but Chairez, to me, round 2, round 3, fairly obvious props, in addition to a live bet after round 1. Would assume you get a better price. Maybe he finishes this again inside of 5 minutes. That last fight, though, took place at the Apex, and I think putting Lacerda in a bigger cage just sort of extends things out a little bit longer, gets you a couple minutes deeper into the fight. So I would pick Chairez to finish in round 2, but I think this could extend maybe even into round 3. His round 2 prop is about plus 380, plus 375, as high as plus 400. Shop around for the best number there. You could find his round 3 prop between plus 900 and plus 1,000. So Shirez round 2, round 3, about 0.15 on the round 2, and then a tenth of a unit on the round 3.
Shirez Lacerda, Billy, why the other side?
Yeah, so the stoppage in the first one, it was a submission that Shirez had put on Lacerda. The ref decided he was unconscious, and then as soon as Shirez let go, Lacerda's like, no, I'm not. I'm talking to you right now. All that. I think I've watched this thing like it's the Zapruder flick. I'm trying to catch every angle of it. I don't think that choke was on. I think Lacerda could have hung out in there almost indefinitely. It's hard to say. You don't necessarily get the angle you want from the UFC broadcast, but knowing what I do about grappling and seeing the way it was applied, I'm pretty sure one of his arteries was fine, and he was just kind of like waiting it out. Don't waste your energy in there. So that's my point on that one. The bigger thing, though, is Lacerda is winning all of his fights right up until he doesn't, and he's 0-4 in the UFC. He has 3 knockdowns in his last 2 losses in the UFC. Like, nobody does that. How do you knock down guys 3 times collectively and then lose both those fights? I just feel like at some point that has to turn around, right? Like, you can't be dominating guys most of the time for so long and then lose forever. There's a reason the UFC has given him another shot despite being 0-4. 0-4 heading into the last one, by the way, that's now a no contest. There's got to be something there. Round 1 at plus 700. I think some places as high as plus 800. He's got to finish this fight, right? So if he's going to win inside the distance at plus 450, I'm looking at that as well. You know, just mainly because you think maybe an early second round stoppage. He's fresh coming off the stool, that kind of thing. Other point I was going to make, though, is Shirez isn't all that good either, right? Like, Shirez is officially 0-1 in the UFC. Fought Tatsuro Taira. That's going to happen. But he got in, you know, he lost on the Contender Series to Clayton Carpenter, where he's taken down 3 times. Lacerda can grapple a little bit. Like, the fight-ending sequence there was because Lacerda took Shirez down. It was kind of swinging the momentum back his way. He's got to know that he needs to just win a fight here. It's like throwing spinning hook kicks and then getting knocked out later is only going to save your job for so long. It's worked so far, but you can't do that forever. I think there's a non-zero chance that Lacerda comes out and just takes the easy path here. Again, still think he needs to finish. Hostile judging, no cardio. There's a lot of reasons. But, yeah, so inside the distance at plus 450 and then the round 1 prop at plus 700. Wish, Sean, though, if we get Shirez at plus money coming into the second or third round, like, I am 100% hedging that. So I'm with him on that. But I do think Lacerda is being underrated here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, he's like one of those archetype of fighters that you either have to bet him in round 1 or you're waiting to bet his opponent live and taking his opponent's late props. There's a lot of fighters that sort of follow this style, I guess, or follow that win condition, and you just have to decide like what part of that fight you want to be on, what side of that fight you want to be, and you have to decide what side of any fight you want to be on, right? But it's a very obvious decision to make. You're not deciding between money line or this guy's decision prop or the other guy's money line. It's literally like one guy in round 1, or you're fading him after round 1 and live betting against him. And it feels like there's at least one fight on every card that kind of has that dynamic. So I don't always end up betting the same side of that. It's not like Billy or I are always betting the guy who we think is going to win in round 1 and then always live betting against them. You know, we took different approaches here. So curious to see how this plays out. But yeah, if you're going to bet Lacerda, like the way Billy bet him is the way you should bet him.
And it's just like, you already mentioned it, so sorry to go back to it, but it's just like Hernandez Kopylov last week. Like, I thought Kopylov could get the finish, made my money back on the live bet at the end of round 1. That's kind of how we're looking to do this. So you take a big swing, and hopefully if it doesn't work out, you can kind of get back to 0 there. If the big swing works, then you're real happy. So a lot of these I wouldn't bet if you're not going to be around to live bet it, which I'm going to stress extremely hard again in my best bet as we get to that in a minute. But
And you admitted earlier that you might be your eyes might be closing. So nice job, Billy. Okay. I'm joking. Best bets. It's not a best bet, really, not a final bet. It's more of a best approach from Sean Zerillo to take us home here for UFC Mexico.
Yeah, you know, as I said, there's a number of totals I'm going to fire on this card. I have other bets for this card, but this is like the best live betting card.
Find them in the app.
In UFC history. Salt Lake City, we've seen 2 cards in Salt Lake City in the past couple of years. Every fighter melted. I mean, we saw some bad, ugly results, sloppy fights. Salt Lake City's at 4,200 feet of elevation. Ciudad de Mexico is at 7,400 feet of elevation. It is an additional 3,000 feet. It's 2,000 additional feet over Denver, Colorado. If you've ever, I've been to Breckenridge. Like, I was struggling going up and down steps. I've been to Mexico City. I went to Mexico City 6 weeks ago. It's not as noticeable as going to a Breckenridge, Colorado, where you actually like are above the point where you're feeling elevation sickness, but your VO2 max is down by like 12 to 15%. Your actual oxygen is down by like 8 to 12%. There's a noticeable impact. So you should be going into this card circling fighters who you plan to live bet after round one. So I'm going to run down the list here of guys I'm targeting. Daniel Zellhuber in the featured bout, he's going against Francisco Prado. Prado is very, very dangerous in round one. I think likely to land something big in round one. Zellhuber, the much better grappler, much better cardio, much more expertly trained at Extreme Couture. I like Zellhuber live after round one. Ricky Tercios. Billy's going to talk about Ricky Tercios in a moment. I like Tercios live after round one. I think he's going to get taken down a bunch, be at a big physical disadvantage against his opponent, Raul Rosas. But after round one, Tercios has cardio for days. This guy looks like he could fight for 25 rounds. He's not the most physical guy, not the strongest guy, but I think he will be around if this fight goes more than 5 minutes. Chris Duncan going against Manuel Torres. Torres, another very aggressive, very dangerous fighter, the much better athlete for 5 minutes. Duncan is going to manage his gas tank better, trains at ATT, going to come in with a game plan. I like Chris Duncan live after a round. Christian Quinones, about 10 years younger, potentially more than Raoni Barcelos. Barcelos, 37, knocked out brutally 2 fights back by Umar Nurmagomedov. He's getting up there in age. I think he's still very talented. I think the elevation is going to be a big issue for him here. So the Mexican fighter Quinones, live after round against Barcelos. Barcelos also another one of these Brazilians who arrived the week of the fight. Another Mexican fighter going against Brazilian, Jesus Aguilar, against Mateus Mendonca. Aguilar should just have better cardio. Again, we talked about the Brazilians arriving late. And then finally, Chairez against Lacerda. Again, Mexican versus Brazilian, training at elevation, arrived late. So all of those angles, mostly on Mexican fighters. I guess the two who aren't are Duncan, and then Tercios, I believe, is American. So yeah, there's at least 7 live angles I'm targeting on this fight or on this card. Victor Altamirano, I should mention as well, because I had him in there earlier. So yeah, great card for live betting. The elevation is going to prove extremely crucial in a lot of these fights.
I think anyone can appreciate how you led your handicap with how you were in Mexico City 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And you
awesome place. Love it. Could not recommend it enough.
You landed the plane. That was good. Billy, you're going to take a simpler approach and give out a fighter on the main card.
Yeah. So Sean referenced this
first because that was a whopper.
I do, because that's part of my angle here. Okay. So my fighter is Raul Rosas Jr. Sean just talked about live betting his opponent. Do not take this if you are not staying up and live betting after the end of round one on his opponent. This is very much, I put in here, in our sheet here, Raul Rosas is the bet. But it's not a bet. It is a family of bets that includes both Raul Rosas and his opponent live. Both guys are 2-1 in the UFC. Raul Rosas, 2 first-round finishes, a dominant first round against Christian Rodriguez, fell off a cliff. That was all at reasonable elevation, right? Ricky Tercios, also 2-1 in the UFC. I think he's a little bit overvalued here. I actually really like the matchmaking from the UFC because they found a guy who's 2-1 in the UFC. Both of his UFC wins are split decisions, and he was taken down 13 times in his 3 UFC fights, which when facing a grappler like Raul Rosas, it's like, you could not pick a better opponent to try to make Rosas look really, really good than Ricky Tercios. With all that said, I have zero faith in Rosas' cardio, right? Like, it fell off a cliff against Quinones. He sells out to fight. I tease my jiu-jitsu brethren all the time about only having 1 round of cardio. And then again, that's like, I'm teasing guys here in Michigan where we don't have any hills, and they're 7,000 feet above sea level there in Mexico City. So this line has dropped a lot. I actually, and I'll admit to my negative line value here, took Rosas at minus 260 earlier in the week with this plan already in place. Now it's like as low as minus 225. I saw minus 218 last night. If you can get that, you just got to make sure that you're betting the other side of it. I think the likeliest outcome here is probably Rosas getting the finish early, but I just want to have bigger than plus 225 on Tercios coming back after he just gets dominated in round 1. Either way, we make a profit, but hopefully Rosas gets it done early. Of course, you could do Rosas inside the distance, Rosas round 1, Rosas under 1.5. All those are options too. But could he come out and dominate a second round, go to a decision, whatever? I'd rather just play it safe. Attempt to lock in a profit either way if we get a big price on Tercios.
There's one angle where I wouldn't live bet Tercios, and that's if Rosas gets a body triangle in round 1 and doesn't have to work that hard. If he slaps on the body triangle and is just holding the back and doesn't have to really work that hard to hold it, I'm probably okay riding out a Rosas bet at that point. But he just seems to have poor energy management. I don't even know if it's like bad cardio as much as it's bad fight IQ or just bad, just bad management of his gas tank. He just doesn't seem to know how often he can go for a takedown before he gasses out. And he's young. He's 19. That'll probably get better with age. His overall skill will get better with age. He's probably continuing to improve. Tercios is 30 years old. We know what he is. So big age differential here. I cite that age differential stat all the time. There is evidence that the age different, it's not an advantage to be 19 going against the 30-year-old. Right. It's more advantageous to be 25 going against the 35-year-old when you're in your physical prime, not when you're coming into your physical prime. So Rosas isn't quite there yet. I think he's going to keep improving though, and he's just so much more physical. He's just going to run into Tercios and probably bowl him over in the first round. And then after that, we'll see how it goes.
To the cardio point, this is just what happens to guys who grew up doing sport grappling, do that primarily, and then put on little gloves. Because in jiu-jitsu competitions, no-gi, whatever, you're sprinting for a takedown or get to a position, then both guys kind of relax, and you play slow, you get to catch your breath. Rosas sprints to that position, right? He gets there, cool. And then there's a guy elbowing him in the head and doing all kinds of stuff, and he's got to react to that. So he just hasn't adapted to that of I can't sprint, rest, because I don't get that rest. So you need to kind of adapt that. And he's 19. He'll figure it out. But that's just a common... Again, I joke about it. I do jiu-jitsu all the time. Those are my people. But it's a real thing, just the nature of the sports being what they are.
And, we went head-to-head on the Christian Rodriguez fight. In hindsight, Christian Rodriguez is a bad bet. But he lost that first round. You could have gotten a better price on Rodriguez live after round 1. So Rosas in round 1 is very, very tough. But after that, once the cardio goes, I think Tercios will work his way back in.
30-year-old Tercios and 19-year-old Rosas, a family of bets. That is a great line from Billy Ward. All right, gents, great work. If you haven't figured this out already, be sure to find Zerillo and Billy Ward in the Action app. Be sure to follow them because of these live betting angles that are, in all likelihood, going to be available on this card for UFC Mexico. That concludes our betting preview for UFC Mexico here on the Action Network podcast. We are presented by our friends at BetMGM. Again, download the free award-winning Action Network app to follow these guys as well as their picks as the night unfolds. Thanks for listening, everybody. Brendan Glasheen signing off. Best of luck with all your picks this weekend, and we'll see you next time on the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM.